Welcome to the Road to Accountable AI. I'm Kevin Werbach, professor of legal studies and business ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies from broadband to blockchain. Today, artificial intelligence promises to transform our world. But AI won't reach its potential without accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. I've had the great fortune of knowing David Weinberger for more than 20 years. Among many other things, he's written 5 thought-provoking books and various other works about the deeper implications, at times even the philosophical implications of the internet and other technologies. When I heard he was working on a new book about AI, I had to talk to him. This is a more abstract conversation than most of the episodes of this podcast, but it's useful periodically to take a step back and consider the fundamental impacts of AI as we decide how to deploy and manage it. David, it is always great to talk to you, and I'm really thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here. Great to see you, Kevin.
You told me recently that you've spent just about every day the last 2.5 years trying to figure out how AI may be changing our fundamental ideas. So my first question to you is why is that an important question to be asking?
Well, it may not be. That would be fair. But the premise of the book is that our dominant tech, the sort of tech you name and age after, historically, at least since 16th century, 17th century, but arguably way longer than that in the West, the dominant tech has, we've shaped our ideas about ourselves around that tech. It's had enormous influence. So basically, we all think of ourselves when we're making decisions or doing almost anything. Our model comes from computing. So in the 1950s up through, we think our brain is getting inputs. We think we're getting inputs and we're processing information and we're coming up with standardized ways of doing it when we can. And that's fine, but I think it's also important to notice that, this is actually coming from the tech. It's not purely that everything affects everything, but the tech seems to be really important in that. And then in the age of the internet, which some of us actually remember, pretty much the current age, incredibly quickly, everything began to look like not just a network, but a network of very loose connections, sort of a hyperlinky sort of network, including how everything works started to look that way. And now the dominant tech is AI, I think. We're at the beginning of the age of AI. That's another premise of the book. And I'm willing to go out on a limb on that. And so what I've been thinking about and trying to write about is it too early to ask how then might AI be shaping how we think about fundamental things? And the answer is, yeah, it's way too early to be thinking about that. So it's a very speculative book. But I think it's a good question to ask and to provide a way of thinking about it, not because it's the right way, but because, I don't know that, but because it gives us a sense of what it means to ask that question. How is our current tech beginning to reshape basically everything about how we think about ourselves? I mean, you think about how how computing changed how we think about everything. It has changed everything. I mean, everything looks like information. And that transformation happened in just a matter of a few years in the early 50s. It was astounding how quickly discipline after discipline, art history all became, we're dealing with information now. And that's fine. There's a lot of benefit in doing that, but it's also a really odd way of thinking about the world. So same thing is happening with AI. I'm not sure how, but I'm sort of poking around at that.
What convinces you that AI is this next fundamental dominant technology? Obviously, right now, there's all kinds of hype and excitement around foundation models and AI companies and so forth. But you've been looking at this for a lot longer than that. So why are you willing to go out on that limb?
It seems to me pretty obvious, which is a terrible thing to say, because what that's saying is I really don't know, and I'm guessing. It seems obvious, of course, that AI is the next thing. It's because I see, and I think we all see to one extent or another, it already happening. It is also a technology that just by its nature is so ripe for us to absorb immediately because it seems so much like us. You know, the large language models are designed to sound like a human being, like the smartest human being you ever met. I mean, that billions of dollars were spent to make it sound like a human being that you can converse with, and you can converse with it. And that has to have, and increasingly we're all doing this. It's coming. The way search, everybody started using search pretty quickly. And, that seems to me very likely has a profound effect on our relationship to the tech. I mean, it was designed to have that relationship. It's very confusing tech. And while I think all of the major providers of the chat AI, LLMs, generative AI stuff, all of which are machine learning. So when I say AI, I'm actually thinking about machine learning.
Right.
They all, I think, correctly and probably truthfully say, no, it's not. You're not supposed to think it's a person. It's not a person. We don't have AGI yet. You know, it's not a person. But 100% it was designed to sound like a person and to be a very knowledgeable person. So it's much easier to imagine that becomes the dominant metaphor or framework for how we think than it is to imagine that Claude Shannon's 1948 mathematical theory that only mathematicians can read would within 4 or 5 years sweep through businesses and the rest of life, convincing us that everything is this new thing. And it was a new thing under Shannon, not without precedent, but it was new. This idea of information. Information was not an important word in our vocabulary. It was sort of a placeholder word for stuff you didn't know, and I'm about to tell you. That's information. And it got this technical meaning from the early...
Ones and zeros, essentially, bytes.
Right. And immediately, everything was information. It's much easier to see that happening with something that presents itself in a way more human accessible way, while in fact it is absolutely the opposite of that. It sounds so much like a human and does all these amazing things outside of chat because it doesn't care. We're not giving it human knowledge and human assumptions.
Right. So maybe you've already answered the question I was going to ask next, but I'll ask it anyway, which is, how then is AI really different than the computing tech that's been our dominant idea for a long time, especially given that, as you say, it's machine learning. It's not, there's a person in there. It's all built on the same kinds of computing primitives that everything else is built on.
It's of course built on the same primitives because it's running on computers, right? But it's a very thick layer designed to hide what's going on underneath it. The big difference, old-fashioned computers, basically computers, in order to get them to work, a developer has to write a program, and that program will reflect the rules of the game, whatever the program is for. Whether it's in chemistry, you have to know about chemistry, or if it's in business, managing a supply chain or whatever, you have to know how supply chains work. And then you create the general rules that you can then feed particulars into an input and get an output. That means that humans have to know stuff in order for it to work. Humans have to know a lot of stuff to get AI to work because it's very complex. But I'll give you a quick example. So 2022, researchers at Leeds University fed 5,600 retinal scans, just images, right, into a machine learning system with some pretty abbreviated health records for the people who owned those eyeballs. And it didn't tell the the system, the AI, anything at all about what we know about how things are connected. So we know that there's a correlation between smoking and heart disease and high cholesterol and heart disease and so forth. We didn't tell it any of that stuff. And
Okay.
it took us 1,000 years of work, cross-cultural, multi-generational project to learn this stuff. And we know a lot about the heart, but they purposely didn't tell it anything at all, so that it could be free, the machine could be free to try to find correlations between the patterns in the retinal scans. It doesn't know what a retinal scan is, it just knows it has a set of images,
Right.
and
Yep.
health records. And it did. And it's very, 5,600 is nothing.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it was able to predict heart disease better than humans can. And now this has been greatly expanded, and there's other diseases, and there's a whole bunch of information in retinal scans, and nobody knows, at least in the case of heart stuff, what the connection is. Because the machine is free to find patterns that may make no sense to humans, that may be too complex and multidimensional and mathematically difficult for humans to understand. But the machine was told, no, do whatever you have to, find whatever correlations in the patterns in the records and the patterns in the retinal scans to help find correlations that will let us predict things. And it did. It didn't care about what we already knew. That would have just limited it. And so it sort of breaks through, and this is a very small thing, right? But it breaks through and now is able to make predictions about health and sort of diagnoses about health that, had we stuck with what we knew, it wouldn't have been able to do. And the way that it's able to do this, and this for me is what I have been concluding and betting on, because it is speculative and it's a wager. One of the important effects of this, beyond the fact that we have these breakthroughs in knowledge, is that it's doing this because it's not paying attention to generalizations. It's not saying, truth exists in the generalizations, the laws and principles, and all of which are real, right? I'm not going to argue with Newton or Einstein. I mean, these are real things. And we're not going to discard them, and we shouldn't discard them. But the particulars are really, really important. So general principles do their job generally. That's why we use them. But we're now able, because these systems aren't built around generalizations, they're more aware of, they don't discard particulars that don't fit in. They look at the particulars of the input, and they have a model that is not based around generalizations. It's a model that connects all of these patterns.
Yep.
And they can be far more particular. We have a culture that is, I'm almost done, right? So we have a culture that this is an answer to why I think this is worth pursuing.
Totally okay.
Okay. So we have a culture that is based around valuing, or as we say, valorizing generalizations. That's where the highest truth is. This has been true in the West, going all the way back to the Greeks, and you can go back before that, where it's a big picture. Literally, the Greeks looked up to the heavens for the big general truths. This earth was all chaotic, but the truth was in the heavens, where universals held. Universals are generalizations, right? So we don't have to throw out the generalizations. We've worked really hard on getting them. Of course, we do when we're training a model, right? We don't give it the generalizations, which is just sort of mind-blowing. Right? That, we've surrendered. We're surrendering everything that we spent generations learning. AI is showing us that it lets particulars speak. And particulars are about differences. Generalizations about what things have in common. Particulars about, they're defined by their differentiation. And so it's a way of letting particulars and differences speak. And that seems to me to be a really profound change in how we think about things. And it's got a proof point, right? Unlike most of these sorts of statements, there's evidence that this works. The evidence is machine learning that's blowing our minds,
Yep. Okay, so this is great. A couple questions that come to mind. One is, isn't the example you gave about the Leeds researchers on the retina scans just an example of a process that's happened for a long time? So it used to be when you bought a car, you had to be a mechanic. You had to understand how a car worked. And nowadays there's a lot more complexity, but you don't need to have any idea about the internal combustion engine to have a car. And same with computers. It used to be, in the 70s to have a personal computer, you need to know something about programming and command line interfaces and so forth. And, then graphical user interfaces came along and so forth. So isn't AI just the next stage of that you don't need to know as much about what's going on behind the screen?
It's what you say is certainly right. And over time, we've had more and more things that we build that we can't understand, but somebody can. I think that's the difference. The CERN particle accelerator gives results that are true, reliable. Science backs them. No reason to doubt them. There is no one person who knows how it works. It's incredibly complex, but there are people who understand how every part of it works. So you may not understand how the electrical system works, but there are engineers there who do. And likewise for your car. Yeah, I mean, I could never repair a car. I certainly couldn't now, but I know people who can. They got shops. This is exposing a truth about the world that is very disturbing for a culture that was brought up, and much less so in the past 150 years, but that was brought up on the idea that humans are our role, our fate, our destiny, our purpose given to us by God is to know and appreciate the universe that God created. And so we are the only ones. That is what makes us us. It's very disturbing. There's still vestiges of this and for practical reasons as well, right? But there's still vestiges of this in I think everybody's thinking in the West that we're that special. And, in lots of ways we are, but that doesn't mean that the universe is a place we can understand. AI is showing us that the tools that we've built, so we do get some credit for that as humans, right? The tools that we've built now are able to expose to us truths by being able to hold more in their brains, more particulars in their brains without reducing them into generalizations, without sticking things into categories or under rules and saying, okay, that's all we need to know. Instead of doing that, we're letting the particulars speak in ways that we can't predict and often can't understand. And they are coming up with the next generation of breakthroughs in knowledge in every area. And it's shocking. I mean, that is sort of yet another Copernican moment, but it's a very realistic one, I think. Of course, the universe is too complex for us. What were we thinking? Well, if you think that it runs by general rules, then you're in a much better position to think, well, yeah, we can do general rules. We've got science and math, and we're very good at this sort of thing. But those generalizations are always, almost always, reductive. They're considering things in one light, but not in all the others. And one of the lessons, I think, practical lessons of machine learning is that machine learning models are multidimensional. I'm going to give you an example. It's slightly extended. Have you ever heard of, and don't be embarrassed because nobody has, which is great for me as a writer, right? Have you ever heard of the Royal Order of Adjectives? Please say no. Please say no. Yeah. Okay. So there is a thing called the Royal Order of Adjectives, which defines the sequence of adjectives in a phrase that has a bunch of adjectives, right? Mm-hmm. And it turns out that it's pretty set. So I think it's 10 different types of adjectives. It's quality, quantity, origin, material, opinion, and so forth. And every time we speak, native English speakers anyway, we get it right. We don't think about it at all. And if I were to tell you what that order is, which I cannot because I can't memorize, it wouldn't help you. I mean, you wouldn't say, oh, yeah, I knew that. You don't have that rule in your head. I don't have that rule in our head, but we conform to it.
Yeah.
Almost without exception. I mean, it's very particular. You know who else conforms to it? Machine learning, the large language models. If you're talking with them, you don't notice that they're getting the order of adjectives right because they do. Right? But as far as I know, there is no place in that machine's model that expresses the rule.
Right.
So it conforms to a rule without having the rule. It turns out we do too. We have a 3-year-old granddaughter who gets it right. And we have never explained the royal order to her, much less what is an adjective. It is hilarious to think about trying to do that to a 3-year-old. It's not how we learn either. So we seem to conform to rules. You conform to the royal order of adjectives. I do. We all do. But none of us know it. And once I knew it, I can't repeat it. I can't. It's not. It's too many. It's 10 in a row. I can't remember that. So there's no reason to think that we are actually rule-based in our construction of at least portions of our language. And AI is evidence of this. And that has changed how I think about our granddaughter learning speech. It's changed how I think about how I speak and how I learn. This is, I think, a case in which I have absorbed machine learning's idea of how we learn, at least language. So these generalizations are really important, especially in science and the like, but they're not the whole story.
The question is, basically, it's not really a hallucination issue. It's if the machine learning system is finding a correlation, which seems to work effectively, seems to be predictive, but actually it's the correlation is based on something else. There's some spurious correlation going on and we don't realize it. And so that means we start giving it new data and then it becomes not accurate.
Many of the correlations are going to be spurious. We just hope they're not getting weighted very heavily. Right. And so the systems, depending on what the system is being used for, it's one thing if it's predicting books for a bookseller where they just want to sell you a book. They don't care anything else. And if it's selling books, then they're happy. And it's, of course, different in healthcare issues or in any issue that touches on fairness, which means the results have to be carefully monitored. Right. And regulated where it counts. Yeah.
So it sounds like then that though means the humans need to come in with our, maybe not rules or maybe not generalizations, but here's what we are trying to do, that the human defined objective of the system at the end, more so than the traditional way we would think about things, which is you start at the beginning, asking a question of how do we figure out what this objective is. Is that essentially consistent with what you're saying?
Yes, although I think there's also a good lesson for us in how you define objective success for an AI program, because it requires really careful thought, especially in complex situations, but even not. So that if it's a health thing, it could be a health AI diagnostic. I'm making this up, but it could well be the case that it's great at prescribing a treatment that works better on some class of people. And then you have to decide, okay, are we going to discriminate by that class because it works better for them? I think the answer is probably yes. I mean, if it's better for women than for men, then okay, we've learned something. And may discriminate in more hidden and terrible ways. I think this is an overstatement, but it really comes down to objectives and consequences, because consequences are measurable. How it's coming up with those consequences is, in many cases, not going to be something we can understand, which means looking at consequences carefully and being aware of, okay, yeah, but who isn't it working for? For example. And there are certainly cases where we rightfully, I think, are going to say, we don't want a system that we can't understand. It's really important for social reasons. And the obvious example there is in the judicial system, where people feel I think they do have a right to know why they were sentenced this way. And being told, well, the AI said so, and and we can't tell you what it's thinking, it's really important that we know. We also sometimes in job application sorting or other sorts of, we think we want to know, but the current system doesn't entitle you to find out why you didn't get a job. And probably the same thing should be applied if the system is incapable of telling you. But you need to be very, very careful to monitor, as we should be very, very careful in human systems as well. And when, as in the famous case of Amazon, who used AI to sort applications, if it turns out that the reason why they keep hiring men is that the system, the AI picked up on the fact that men tend to use particular words which might surprise you in their essays, and it was being trained on the current employees of Amazon who had succeeded, who historically had been mainly men, then you have just created another instance of unfair hiring. But generally, it comes down to consequences, and there's dangers there.
Isn't that Amazon type example of AI bias, though, a matter of the AI generalizing? Just going back to what you were saying before, that it's the nature of this technology is it's particularizing, it's picking up on a pattern, a general pattern. Historically, men did better than women at Amazon, and not looking at the person as individual.
It's picking up on a pattern in the applications, and it is preferring those applications. Those applications get more weight because they resemble the applications of Amazon employees who succeeded there. So part of this has to do with what constitutes being a success at Amazon. It gets trickier in say, education, where, well, it's tricky anywhere. What constitutes being a success, right? Because we live in a multivariable universe in which everything connects to everything else, and you have to make choices, whether you know or not. You're making choices that affect your whole suite of values. So yes, it is. You're making a very good point about it being a generalization. So these models generalize at a much finer grain of particularity. They can consider many more individual factors, but they do have to. It is a generalization giving weight to particular patterns. Patterns are generalizations.
On this question of algorithmic fairness, I just want to ask you several years ago were embedded with a group at Google that, among other things, built a tool for visualizing different definitions of algorithmic fairness and how that would impact on data sets and so forth. Do you have any sense about how far we've come since that time in the understanding of how to address this problem of algorithmic fairness?
So there's a huge amount of research, as you know, and lots of ideas, and some of the ideas would require regulation to put into place. Some of them, but not all of them, would sacrifice some degree of predictive accuracy in order to ensure fairness, and that's not a question. That is not a machine learning question. That's a human question, which is what it should be. There are more ideas about how to do it, all of them with trade-offs, and more technology for looking into this stuff as well, to do forensic probes and the like. I am not in a position to know whether we will ever solve the problem and be able to have both the accuracy we want and the explainability that we would want. I end up arguing. I spend more time, I think, arguing against explicability than for it, but only because I know there is a very, very competent, technically and philosophically, cohort of people who are doing a much better job than I could in arguing for it. So I just sort of want to raise my hand occasionally and say, well, but there's also the world is inexplicable. The reason the machine learning is a black box is that the world is a black box. It's getting, we're getting data that's a very weird sort of readout from meters stuck into the earth. And all that data put together, you end up with a black box when you allow a super sophisticated computer to analyze the data in it. That's because that's how the world is. And it's good to recognize that. That's really what I'm interested in. But it's also good to remember the trade-offs. And I think the people in the field are well aware of them, of the trade-offs. And I'm really glad that they are. But transparency is not a value in itself, right? I mean, it's often very much a value for particular reasons. Well, you're wearing clothes, so transparency is not a value in itself. Okay, worst analogy ever.
So it'd be a very different podcast. Probably not very popular.
And as you can tell, I'm completely transparent, if you know what I mean. This isn't video, is it? It's often an important value. It's not an absolute value.
Yeah. Couple more things I just want to probe you on. You mentioned earlier that the internet got us to focus on this environment of distributed networks of networks, things connecting. You wrote a book called Small Pieces Loosely Joined.
Many years ago,
really described this vision and this structure. And really the internet has focused a lot on the power of decentralization. Now with AI, we've got potentially the need for this massive amount of compute and data centers and a small number of technical experts, and this concern that everything's going to centralize back into a few companies who are the only ones who can provide the underlying technology. Is that something that we should be worried about?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. Our interests as people and citizens are generally not aligned with mega corporations, the richest companies on the planet. It's just, so yeah, that's scary. And the companies generally are not proving themselves to be good actors in this. That's why we have regulation. It would, the Chinese DeepSeek promises that machine learning power can perhaps be more distributed than we thought it was. On the other hand, they were using OpenAI's massive, very expensive models, apparently. I don't know. I would very much like to see smaller models, new companies, and more control over what they're allowed to do. I'm on the wrong side of the copyright issue for AI, for almost all of my peers. I want them to know as much as what's in the public as possible, and keeping what you've written out of their hands because of copyright seems, I'm not a lawyer, but doesn't make sense to me as a citizen in terms of the law. It seems to me to be fair use, because these systems as they exist don't make or keep a copy. They go through your text looking to see which words go next to other words. They can't reproduce. If you ask them to reproduce a chapter of your book, they can't do it. They won't do it either. Or at least the ones I've tried now have a little guardrail set up. But they couldn't anyway, because they don't have the copy. All that reading your books or my books do is nudge infinitesimally words closer or further apart from each other. That's it. So, and I do want them to know as much as possible. Not necessarily about you and me as people, but about what we have written and put in the public.
Because that makes the AI better?
Yeah, because it makes it smarter. And I wanted to know more about other cultures as well. One of the problems with the large language models, which I find incredibly useful in all sorts of ways. One of the reasons Socrates was against literacy was that the first reason is the more famous one and perfectly correct, which is we'll lose our memory because we externalize. Absolutely happened. We can no longer recite the 15,000 lines of the Iliad. I mean, I can do about 7,000, but that's about it. Yep. He was right about that. He also worried that literacy, you can't have a conversation with a book, he said. And he was the conversation guy. So that seemed like a real limitation. But I do this all the time now with the chat AI stuff. I talk with them. I mean, it's metaphor. I understand it's not real talk. It's not really talking with an agent, but I'm able to ask them questions, to push back on things. It is like talking to a person. I find it incredibly helpful. One of the problems with with these systems, or maybe a strength, is that they tend to reflect a quote mainstream point of view, and not on purpose. It's just that we, let's say, white English-speaking men have flooded the zone in terms of who's had the opportunity to publish, especially over the long term. So, in one sense, that's kind of okay because it's better probably than one of the alternatives, which is that it becomes a highly partisan conspiracy theory based system. But overall, it's really reinforces the bland power of bland white men.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be nice to get a handle on that as well,
Mm-hmm.
which you do not do by withholding your texts. But everybody I know disagrees with me, so I suspect I'm really wrong about this.
That's okay. So maybe this is where you're not a lawyer, but I think a lot about these policy questions, and I guess what I'm wondering is, does it help us to debate what to do about regulating AI, to have a deeper understanding about what AI means? If we just think about it as though this is just a tool, it's another kind of computers, versus you're focusing on it as really it's transforming the nature of our ideas and how we understand reality. Can that actually be constructive in these policy debates?
Well, that's a horrifying question. I try to avoid that. But is what I'm doing with my life actually helpful in any way?
I wasn't asking that question. It's helpful in lots of
well,
ways.
That's how I'm taking it.
In terms of No. I really focus on this matter, because you talked about there's a lot of places where the issues you raise touch on. Well, we've got companies that are too powerful. We've got AI bias. We've got these, it gets used in the courts and so forth. And we have all these debates about, where do we regulate and how do we regulate versus, the other side is just, any regulation gets in the way of innovation and we should just let everything happen. So I'm just curious how you think about it.
So in terms of monitoring and affecting the consequences of these applications, I think that's not affected by the sort of thing that I'm interested in. I think it's really important that happen. And I recognize it's really hard to get it right. But if you are talking with somebody who wants to regulate AI to make it more transparent, I don't think this is surprising, but I think it's really good to ask them what they mean by transparency and to make sure that they understand why AI is not transparent. Roughly, it's because it's reflecting the non-transparency of the world, and to demand that AI be transparent is more transparent than it can be, right? It should be more transparent. That would be great. Is like demanding that the earth, the world, our lives be more transparent. That's nice. King Canute, he has a bad rep now, but he stood on the shore, the Danish king stood on the shore and commanded the waves to stop. Now he was doing it in order to show that I'm just a person. I may be king, I can't stop it. So I agree with him on that. I think it's important to recognize that sort of the grounding of transparency and why it's a difficult request and what's at stake is it's who we are as humans, and it's tough being a human.
We don't really have any choice, though, do we?
Not till we get the brain, the neural implants. When we become Elon-based humans. So.
All right, David, thank you. This has been terrific. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Likewise. I'm just glad to see you.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening.
This is Kevin Werbeck. If you want to go deeper on AI governance, trust, and responsibility with me and other distinguished faculty of the world's top business school, sign up for the next cohort of Wharton's Strategies for Accountable AI online executive education program. featuring live interaction with faculty, expert interviews, and custom-designed asynchronous content. Join fellow business leaders to learn valuable skills you can put to work in your organization. Visit execed.wharton.upenn.edu/ACAI for full details. I hope to see you there.